He sold a bottle of whiskey to an alien stepmother. Now all three of her daughters call him husband.
The barter zone on the outskirts of Relin 3 wasn't a marketplace anymore. Not in the traditional sense. It was a graveyard of deals. Former store stalls had been reduced to scaffold boxes and crooked metal rods lashed together with wire. Fabric signs hung half-shredded, and solar panels blinked weakly from cluttered roofs, barely drawing power. Smoke drifted through the gaps, rising from barrels lit for warmth. No music, no announcements, just the sound of quiet haggling, coughing, and wind brushing over dust-buried crates. Corin Vale stepped between the rows, shoulders hunched under his faded canvas coat. His boots crushed bits of glass and shell-packed fragments with each slow step. He wasn't here to trade. Not really. He came for scraps, salvage data drives, nutrient packs, maybe a few clean batteries. Quiet things. Simple things. Anything that let him keep his distance from people. Corin had once worked for a terraforming supply chain. Inventory control, station side. That job died along with the funding. The outpost collapsed. The pay stopped. So did most things. He didn't move to the outskirts. He stayed there after everyone else left. Now he survived by trading with the old systems left behind, data tablets, and used filters, rare whiskey bottles he found in collapsed storage hubs. One bottle. That's all he carried today, and he planned to drink it alone when the sun dipped behind the rust hills. But he made a mistake. He let show. From a narrow stall half-shaded by warped fencing, a voice called out. Low, graveled, slurred by years of use and neglect. "You got liquor in that bag?" Corin turned just slightly. He saw her, a woman in a ragged market shawl tied with plastic tags, hunched over a counter made from a rebar slab. Her hair was greased and stringy, held back by copper wiring. She looked exhausted, not tired from the day, but tired from surviving it all. He didn't answer. She stepped forward, eyes sharp now, scanning him head to toe. "That's whiskey. Terran. Real stuff." Corin paused. "Maybe." She reached down to something behind the table. A switch clicked. A cage unlocked with a mechanical whine. 3 young women stepped into the light. They didn't look like her. Their skin was luminous purple, violet-toned, smooth, marked with faint silver traces along the collarbone and thighs. Their hair was bone white, long, braided with uneven ties. All 3 were barefoot. Their clothing was inconsistent, barely functional. Makeshift scraps, ceremonial wraps, and wiring used as belts. The woman gestured. "I'll trade you them." All 3. Corin didn't move. "They're my stepdaughters," she said. "Don't give me that face. They're not mine by blood. I raised them until it stopped matching. They don't listen. They eat too much. I'm leaving this pit." She jerked her chin toward a nearby tramway, where cargo sleds powered by surface friction rails blinked low orange in standby. "Got a seat on that tram. Need a drink for the road. You give me that bottle, they're yours." Corin stood still. His fingers gripped the strap of his bag. His first thought, she can't be serious. His second, they're not resisting. The oldest woman, Rinya, looked straight at him. Her arms were crossed under her chest. One side of her deep burgundy wrap hung low, exposing a hip and half her torso. Her eyes were sharp, unforgiving. The middle one, Caliph, didn't raise her eyes. Her white tunic clung loosely to her figure, sheer under the sunlight. Her hands stayed clenched at her sides, knuckles white. The youngest, Sairi, sat back on her knees, posture gentle. Her ceremonial wrap had fallen to one shoulder, revealing the top of her chest. She didn't cover herself. She only watched Corin with a steady, open gaze. They didn't flinch. Corin looked at the stepmother again. "You're leaving them behind. For one bottle." She took a step closer. Her voice dropped. "They don't need me. They need someone who can feed them, keep them from freezing." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Besides, someone else was going to take them eventually. Might as well be you." Corin looked again at the girls. His chest tightened. They weren't panicked. They weren't crying. They were still. He reached into his pack and took out the bottle. The woman's eyes lit up. She grabbed it, twisted off the cap, and took a long drink. Her throat worked hard to swallow. She sighed. "Fair trade," she muttered, then turned. "Good luck with them." She walked off without another word. disappearing behind a curtain of stall flaps. Silence followed. Corin exhaled. This isn't what I came for. Rinya stepped out of the shadow, keeping her eyes on his. We didn't ask to be traded. Sairi rose slowly. But we have nowhere to go. Kalith said nothing. Her eyes briefly met his, then dropped again. He ran a hand down his face. The heat pressed in. His shelter was over 2 kilometers west. 1 bottle of water left. Not enough rations for 4. Follow me, he said. He didn't turn to see if they obeyed, but he heard their bare feet in the dirt behind him. The walk was long and silent. Corin's mind turned over too many questions. Were they injured? Sick? Had anyone touched them before this? Would they expect something from him? Were they truly alone now? By the time they reached the container shelter, dusk had painted the sky a muddy gray-orange. His shelter was simple. A large cargo container propped up by metal stilts, reinforced with scrap plates and solar foil. Inside, 1 cot, a heater, an old workstation. No bathroom, just a drainage pipe behind a privacy curtain. He opened the door and let them in first. Rinya stepped in like she owned the place, looked around, and sat on the cot. Kalith walked the perimeter, lightly touching the wall panels. Sairi stayed near the door, arms folded in front of her chest, watching Corin. He opened a food crate and set 3 ration bars on the table. Not much, he said. No promises after this. Rinya picked one up and tore into it without hesitation. Better than the lot, she said through her teeth. Sairi sat cross-legged on the floor. She chewed slowly, looked at him between bites. Kalith didn't eat. She held her ration but didn't unwrap it. Her face was unreadable. As the heater kicked in, the air inside warmed slightly. Corin removed his coat and set it over a box. The girls hadn't brought anything. Not a bag, not a spare cloth, just themselves. Night fell. Corin moved to the floor near the heater, rolling out a spare blanket. Then he heard movement. A soft step. Sairi stood over him, blanket draped around her shoulders, still wearing the same wrap that clung to her thighs. If you want me, she whispered, I can stay close. For warmth. Corin looked up. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't bargaining. It sounded like tradition, like something taught. No, he said. You take the cot. I'll sleep here. Her expression barely changed. Just a small blink. She nodded, sat beside him, still silent. From the cot, Rinya scoffed. Never seen a man turn that down before. Kalith sat curled in the far corner, back to the wall, her head down. Her body trembled slightly, though the room wasn't cold. And then the sound came, small, choked. She was crying. No sobbing, just held in gasps and the occasional sharp breath through her nose. Corin sat upright. He didn't approach, but he didn't ignore it. They were strangers. They weren't safe yet, not in their minds. But tonight, no one was screaming. No one was touching. No one was taking. That would have to be enough. The heater buzzed softly in the silence. Pale blue light pulsed from its vent slats, throwing flickers across the walls of the container shelter. Corin lay on his back, blanket pulled up to his ribs, staring at the ceiling like it might collapse inward. The weight wasn't physical. It was the heaviness of presence, of not being alone anymore. 3 bodies now occupied this space. None of them familiar. None of them predictable. He hadn't asked their names. Not really. He only remembered what the stepmother had muttered before disappearing. Something about Rinya, Kalith, and Sairi. No surnames. No clan marks. No origin details. He turned his head slightly. The cot creaked. Sairi had taken his place there after all, small-framed, back curled inward, one arm hanging off the side as if she'd drifted into sleep in mid-thought. The ceremonial wrap still hugged her thighs, but a strip of it had slipped, exposing the curve of her waist under the dim light. Rinya slept near the door, one leg propped, one hand under her head. She hadn't taken off the burgundy wrap. She hadn't even loosened it. Her breathing was slow, steady, but her body posture wasn't relaxed. It was guarded, like a soldier napping with one eye open. Kalith hadn't moved. She was still in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, tunic crumpled around her thighs. At some point during the night, she had pulled a storage blanket down from the shelf and wrapped it over her shoulders. Her face remained buried in her arms. Corin shifted upright, quietly. The room was too small for thoughts to go unnoticed, too quiet for anxiety to hide. He rose and padded barefoot to the supply crate near the workstation. He pulled out a water flask, took one sip, then looked back. Still asleep, or at least pretending. Why didn't they run? Why didn't they ask for anything? Why did that woman walk away so easily? Corin wasn't naive. He'd seen cruelty dressed up as pragmatism. He'd heard stories, abandoned daughters, silent trades, indentures disguised as marriages. But what stuck with him wasn't just the woman's bitterness. It was how resigned the girls had been. He returned to the heater and sat down beside it. "Why did you take us?" a voice asked quietly. "Caliph." She hadn't moved her face from her knees, but her voice carried clear. Soft. "Hello." Corin answered without delay. "I didn't take you. She left you." A pause. Then Caliph asked again, quieter. "So why didn't you leave too?" Corin thought for a moment. "Because you didn't ask to be left." That silence lingered. Then Caliph lay down fully, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "You should have," she whispered. Morning came without sunlight, just a dull gray creeping through the vents. The air was dry, still, silent except for occasional metal ticks as the walls adjusted to the temperature shift. Sairi woke first. She sat up quietly, rubbed her eyes, and padded toward the food crate. She took out one ration bar, looked at it, then set it down. Instead, she grabbed the water flask and poured a tiny amount into a cracked ceramic bowl. She moved to the wall sink, dipped the edge of a rag into it, and began wiping the dust off the outer console. Corin blinked. "What are you doing?" She looked up, then smiled, small, apologetic. "You gave us shelter. I want to make the place cleaner." He stared at her a beat longer, then nodded once. "That's not required." "I know." She continued wiping. Rinya stirred second. She rolled over, stretched, and groaned. "How far are we from the rail lines?" she muttered. Corin stood. 10 clicks south. She looked at him. "Anyone patrol that stretch?" "No one's patrolled anything in 3 years." She raised an eyebrow. "So no one's coming to look for us?" "No," Corin said simply. "No one's coming." Rinya stood and cracked her neck. "Good." Corin finally asked the question that had been burning since yesterday. "Why didn't she sell you earlier?" Caliph answered from her corner. "She tried." Corin looked over. Caliph remained wrapped in the blanket. Her voice didn't change tone, but buyers don't want the ones who look too proud, or too quiet, or too broken. Rinya snorted. Or the ones who look back. Corin understood now. They've been offered before, turned down, discarded, then finally left behind like parts that didn't fit any machine. He looked at each of them again. Rinya, full of edge and sharp glances. Caliph, numb but watching. Sairi, quietly filling space with kindness like it was the only thing left she could control. "I don't want anything from you," Corin said clearly. "Not food, not cleaning, not your bodies. This isn't a trade." Rinya folded her arms. "So what is it?" Corin met her stare. "It's a place to sleep. Nothing more. Until you decide what's next." Rinya didn't respond right away. Then she glanced at Sairi, then Caliph. She didn't argue. Later that day, Corin brought in an old metal tray of scavenged solar wires and filters, dropped it onto the floor, and began sorting. Caliph eventually rose and knelt beside him. "What is all this?" "Old water filters. I repair and trade them." She looked closer. "They're corroded. I clean the rust. Replace the membranes if I can find any. Then I barter them for food parts." Caliph picked one up, turned it in her fingers. "You work quietly. That's the point." That night, Caliph didn't return to her corner. She slept closer to the cot. Not beside Corin, just not far. Rinya didn't speak again until evening. She sat outside on the ramp, watching the horizon. When Corin joined her, she didn't look at him. "She was my stepmother since I was 10. After the city collapsed. She kept us alive, but not warm. Not fed. Not safe." Corin sat down beside her. Rinya continued. "So, yeah, we followed her, because there was nowhere else to go. And when she traded us for a bottle, we didn't even flinch." She looked at him now. "You should know what you took in." "I know," Corin said quietly. She looked back to the horizon. "No, I don't think you do yet." That night, no one cried. But no one laughed either. They just slept, Closer this time. Blankets rearranged, space shared, heat pooled between unfamiliar bodies learning not to fear the nearness of another. Corin didn't touch them, but he didn't sleep on the floor either. Sci-Fi pulled his blanket beside hers without saying a word. In the quiet hum of the heater, surrounded by women who had no reason to trust anyone, Corin felt the weight of something new. Not obligation, not guilt, responsibility. One he hadn't asked for, but didn't intend to abandon. The shelter's walls vibrated with a low hum as a windstorm swept across the ridge. Dust scraped against the exterior like sandpaper over old tin. Inside, the air was still warm from the heater's quiet persistence. It was early morning, uncertain gray. Corin stood at the narrow mirror near the utility sink, buttoning up his shirt. His reflection stared back at him with tired eyes, short dark blonde hair flattened to one side. Jawline dusted with growth he hadn't bothered to shave in days. Behind him, the cot was empty. The three women were already awake. Sci-Fi sat cross-legged on the floor, peeling apart the last ration bar into equal chunks, placing each piece on folded cloth napkins. She didn't look up. Her focus was steady, hands precise. Caliph stood beside the workbench, holding a rusted water filter in one hand, inspecting it under the slanted daylight that poured through a crack in the wall panel. She didn't speak, hadn't spoken all morning, but her body was calm now, not curled in like before. Rinya leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the hills. One hip jutted out slightly, the long burgundy wrap slung low, exposing much of her right leg inside. She looked like someone waiting for a fight, or maybe for something worse. Corin cleared his throat. We'll need to find more food today. That was the last bar. Sci-Fi nodded. I'll come with you. No, Corin said. It's half a day's walk to the Ridge Depot and back. The wind's picking up. You'd freeze without proper gear. I can manage, she replied. Caliph turned. She's not wrong. You can't go alone. What if something happens? Corin raised an eyebrow. What's going to happen out there? There's no one left. Rinya finally spoke. She means, what if you don't come back? The words landed harder than intended. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Corin looked at each of them. I'll come back. Then he grabbed his satchel, slung it over his shoulder, and nodded once before heading toward the outer hatch. But just before he stepped outside, Caliph called out. Wait. He paused. She approached, holding something, one of the solar flare markers from the storage shelf. A small beacon light used to signal coordinates. Take this. If you fall or get stuck, hit the button. Corin hesitated, then took it. Thanks. Caliph didn't smile, but her eyes lingered on him longer than before. The hatch opened with a hard grind. The wind bit immediately. He stepped out into it, coat flapping, boots crunching the loose gravel. Inside, the door sealed shut again. For the first few minutes, no one moved. Then Rinya pushed off the wall. You know he's not like the others, she muttered. Sci-Fi smiled faintly. That's why we're still here. Caliph sat on the floor near the heater. That's what worries me. The storm lasted longer than expected. By dusk, the light had turned orange-red, and the horizon was blurred by thick dust clouds. The shelter rattled again, the wind screaming across the steel stilts. Sci-Fi moved to the door twice, each time stepping back before opening it. Rinya paced, tapping her fingers against the pipe railing. Caliph sat near the storage crates, disassembling one of the old filters by hand. He said he'd be back by nightfall, Sci-Fi whispered. He will, Rinya replied, but her voice lacked confidence. Unless something changed. Caliph didn't say it as a threat, just a fact. But the thought sent a ripple through the room. What if he didn't come back? Would they stay here? Would they try to survive alone again? Could they? Rinya finally snapped. We've waited for worse men to return. Why is this one so different? Sci-Fi looked up from the floor. Because he doesn't want anything from us. That's not normal, Caliph said, still working the filter casing. That's what makes it dangerous. No, Sci-Fi said quietly. That's what makes it real. An hour passed. Then footsteps. Fast. Close. They all stood up at once. The hatch opened. Corin stepped through, shoulders hunched, breathing heavy, arms full of a wrapped bundle. He dropped it onto the cot and shut the door behind him. His coat was covered in dust, and his cheeks were raw from windburn. I found a wrecked delivery drone, half buried under a ridge beam. Its cache was intact. Medical gel packs, a few sealed nutrient kits. He unwrapped the bundle. Small white boxes stacked tight together, labeled with faded corporate glyphs. Calith's eyes widened. How'd you lift all that alone? Didn't. He nodded to his shoulder. Dislocated it halfway up the hill. Had to reset it against a rock. Took longer than I thought. He wasn't bragging, just stating what happened. Sairi stepped forward, gently touched his arm. He flinched, then relaxed. She asked, "Did you use the flare?" Corin shook his head. "Didn't want to worry you." Calith muttered, "Too late." Rinya crouched near the bundle. She opened one box, inspected the contents. "This is clean stock. It'll last weeks if we ration it right." Corin sat down slowly, shoulders stiff. He leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. None of the women moved toward the food. They looked at him instead. He opened his eyes again, aware of the silence. "What?" Calith finally broke it. "Why are you doing this? What's your angle?" Corin didn't answer immediately. He stared at the floor, thought carefully. Then, "I lived alone for 2 years. Watched neighbors vanish one by one. Some left. Some didn't make it. One died 3 feet from my door, and I didn't open it." He looked up. "I told myself it wasn't my problem." Rinya crossed her arms. "And now we are." "No," he said. "Now I'm making different choices." Sairi knelt beside him. Her hand gently pressed his shoulder. "Not out of duty, but comfort. You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not." Calith sat down across from him. "Then what are we to you?" Corin looked at all three. His voice didn't rise. "People. That's enough for now." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Rinya picked up a gel pack, tossed it to him. "Eat something before you pass out, people guy." He smiled once, tired, crooked, real. That night, they didn't just eat together. They sat closer, not as strangers, not yet as family, but something in between, something new, the kind of new that scared them more than being alone, but also warmed them in ways they hadn't felt since the world began to fall apart. None of them dared say it aloud, but the space between them was no longer just shelter. It was starting to become home. The next morning broke quietly. The wind had died overnight, leaving behind stillness, an eerie kind of peace that made every movement inside the container feel louder. Metal ticked softly. Fabric shifted. Someone exhaled. Corin woke before the others. He sat on the cot, elbows on his knees, rolling his shoulders slowly. It still ached from yesterday's climb, the muscles tight, bruised, but he didn't regret going. The look on their faces when he returned, that flicker of disbelief and something like trust, had made it worth it. He reached for the gel pack Rinya had tossed him. Unopened. He'd eaten nothing last night. Now, as he bit into it, he noticed something. Not hunger. Something else. He didn't feel alone. Behind him, someone stirred. Calith, still wrapped in a thermal blanket. She lay curled on the floor, just a few feet away. Her silver-flecked eyes were open, watching him. Not startled, just quietly present, as if she'd been observing his thoughts all night. "You didn't sleep much," she said softly. Corin nodded. Didn't want the shoulder to lock up. Calith pushed herself upright. Her thin tunic slipped slightly, revealing the line of her hip before she adjusted it without comment. She rubbed her hands together for warmth, then looked at him again. "You're not used to people watching you, are you?" "No," he admitted. She gave a small shrug, then looked around the room. "We never really had anywhere quiet. Not like this." Corin looked at her, measuring her voice, soft, deliberate, but without the hollow tone she'd carried before. "Where were you before your stepmother brought you here?" Calith's eyes lowered. She didn't answer immediately. "We were on a trade convoy," she said eventually. 3 months, maybe more. Everything bartered. Her body, our labor, sometimes worse. Her voice didn't crack, but her fingers trembled where they gripped the edge of the blanket. Corin didn't interrupt. She told the convoy master we were hers. Said she'd raised us after the war hit our district. Maybe she did for a while. I don't remember being alone before her, but I don't remember ever feeling safe either. She pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. We got passed between outposts, slept in loading bays, behind storage units. Sometimes we were locked in rooms while she negotiated things. He could tell from her face she was only saying part of it. Just the cleanest parts. She was waiting for someone to buy one of us. Maybe all of us. But no one ever did. Calith's eyes met his now steady. Not until you. Corin felt the weight of that. He said quietly, I didn't buy you. Her head tilted slightly. Then what are we doing here? That silence was heavier than anything the wind had ever carried. He looked her in the eyes. I don't know, but I'm not putting a price on it. Calith nodded, but her expression didn't soften. You should know, I don't trust easy. Not anymore. I don't expect you to, Corin said. She studied him. That's why I think I might. Just then, the hatch hissed open slightly, and Rinya entered, carrying a folded tarp in one hand and a coil of stripped wiring in the other. Morning therapy? She muttered, eyeing them both. Or just airing out trauma? Calith pulled the blanket tighter around her. Just starting the day. Rinya set the supplies down and knelt by the wall. Storm cracked one of the heat coils outside. I'm going to strip a line from the fence and reroute it. Corin moved to stand. I'll help. No, Rinya interrupted. I've got it. You're still healing, remember? The heroic solo act was yesterday. She glanced at Calith, then back at Corin. Besides, you've got company. She stepped outside without waiting for an answer. Calith let out a slow breath. She likes you. No, she doesn't. She does, Calith said, not smiling. That's why she's rude. Sairi emerged from the sleeping corner, arms above her head in a stretch. Her wrap had slipped lower than usual, but she didn't seem to notice or didn't care. What smells like sweat and awkward honesty in here? She asked with a yawn. Corin blinked, caught off guard. Sairi looked at him, then at Calith, and chuckled softly. Relax. I'm glad everyone's talking. She crossed the room, touched Corin's shoulder again, gently this time. Does it still hurt? Less today. I could massage it. We used to help each other after convoy days. There's a pressure point near the collar that Corin cut in gently. You don't need to offer anything. I know, she said, smile fading just slightly. But I want to. He looked at her. Not her body, her expression. She wasn't teasing. She was offering care the way others might offer a bandage. After a pause, he nodded once. Later, if it's okay. Sairi nodded. Of course. They share breakfast, small slices of rehydrated starch bread and a single packet of fruit gel. Not much, but enough to keep moving. No one complained. Their seating was closer now. Their hands reached across each other's arms, and no one flinched. Later, Corin stood outside, helping Rinya twist the wires into a makeshift heat coil. She didn't speak much, but at one point, as they worked side by side, she muttered, You talk like you don't want anything from us. But what if we want something from you? Corin turned to her. Like what? Rinya didn't look at him. A reason to stay. Corin didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the coil's bracket, locked it into place, and let the tension hum through the wire. Then, quietly, Then I guess I'll have to give you one. And for the first time since they arrived, Rinya smiled. It was barely a smile, but it was real. The wind had shifted again by nightfall. Not violent, just a steady, pulsing presence that curled around the container like a living thing. Inside, the heat coil sputtered softly, but it held. The room was dim, lit only by a low lamp and the faint orange flicker of the portable stove where Calith stirred a pot of rehydrated grain. It was the first proper meal since they'd arrived. Not just ration bars, not split protein paste. Real food, something warm. It filled the space with a smell that almost felt like comfort, lightly spiced, vaguely sweet, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Sairi sat close to Corin, curled up beside him on a storage bin. Her bare legs were folded beneath her, and her wrap had slipped lower again as she leaned into his side, head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move her away. Not this time. There was nothing sexual in the gesture, just quiet, chosen contact. Her body was soft against his arm, but her breathing was calm, measured. She wasn't offering herself. She was resting. Across the room, Rinya cleaned dust from her blade, a salvage utility knife she'd claimed from the tool chest. She didn't speak, but she watched them both now and then, as if measuring something unspoken in the silence. Calith stirred the pot again and glanced over. It's done. She poured the food into 4 dented metal bowls, handed them out one by one, then sat on the floor with her own. Corn took a bite. He paused. "It's good." Caliph looked at him. "I added something from your med kit. Crushed vitamin blend. It simulates salt." She shrugged. "We used to do that in the convoy camps." Sci-Fi smiled. "Back then we used to eat dry powder mixed with ration water. This is practically luxury." Rinya didn't comment, but she finished her bowl faster than anyone else. After they ate, they cleaned up together. Caliph wiped the bowls with heated cloth. Sci-Fi scrubbed the small prep table. Corin repaired a loose latch on the door panel. Even Rinya helped reseal one of the side vents without being asked. When the light dimmed further, Corin flicked off the lamp. One by one, the girls settled into their sleeping spots, but this time they didn't spread far. Caliph chose the center space near the heater. She no longer wrapped herself in a blanket alone. Instead, she shared it. Half of it folded open between her and Corin's cot. Rinya lay beside the door, closer than before, her body turned toward the group instead of away from it. And Sci-Fi, without saying anything, lay back down beside Corin on the cot. Not pressed against him, not demanding anything, but close, intentional. He turned slightly toward her. She looked up. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. "I feel safer here," she replied. "That's all." He nodded, but he didn't sleep. Not for a while. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the quiet rise and fall of their breathing. The way their bodies now rested without tension. How none of them flinched at sound or silence. It wasn't just survival anymore. They were choosing this. In the middle of the night, Caliph stirred. She sat up, blanket slipping off her shoulder, tunic clinging to her side. She crossed the room silently and knelt beside the cot, looking down at Corin. He looked up. She didn't speak for a while. Then, "Do you ever wonder what happens after this?" He didn't answer immediately. "After what?" he asked. "This. Us. Here. It can't be just survival forever." He studied her. The silver glints in her eyes caught the dim light. Her face looked softer than before, more tired, but also more present. "I haven't thought that far," he admitted. Caliph nodded slowly. Then she lowered her voice. "I used to imagine my first night in a real home would feel like escape. Quiet, alone, safe. And..." She shook her head. "It's not quiet. I hear Sci-Fi's breathing. Rinya's tossing. I smell the stove and rust and dust. And I feel..." She hesitated. "Warm." He didn't speak. He let her finish. She leaned a little closer. "It's terrifying, but I don't want to leave." Corin's voice was steady. "Then don't." Caliph looked at him longer than she ever had. Then she leaned forward slowly, rested her forehead against his. Not a kiss, just a point of contact. Warm, human. She didn't say anything else. Just stayed there for a long moment, breathing steady. Then she moved back, curled up beside the cot. Half her blanket draped over both of them. In that night, Corin didn't sleep on the edge of the bed. He lay in the middle, surrounded by 3 quiet bodies, all sharing the same fading warmth in a metal box at the edge of a dead world. He'd started this alone, but somewhere in that silence, without anyone forcing anything, something had changed. They weren't guests anymore. They were his. Not as property, but as people who had chosen to stay. And for the first time in a long time, he let that responsibility feel like something else entirely. Hope. The shelter's generator failed just after dusk. It didn't go out with a dramatic flash or explosion, just a soft click of a rising hum that sputtered into silence. The interior lights blinked twice, then went dark. The heat coil stopped buzzing. Only the sound of the wind outside remained. Inside, the temperature began to fall fast. Corin stood over the storage console, hands buried in a bin of stripped parts, searching for a fuse that probably didn't exist anymore. His breath steamed slightly in the cold. The others moved slowly in the dark behind him, wrapped in what they could find, blankets, tarps, each other. Sci-Fi's voice broke the quiet. "Is it bad?" Corin didn't look up. Coil junction failed. Generator's still alive, but we're not getting heat. Can be fixed? If I had the right parts, he muttered. Which I don't. He set down the panel and exhaled. His shoulder ached again. So did his jaw from clenching. He felt their eyes on him, and not for the first time, he resented how much they trusted him. He hadn't asked for this weight, but they'd given it anyway. Caliph knelt beside the heater, running her hands over the shell. How long before the cold becomes a problem? Few hours, Corin said. Depends on how fast the wind shifts. They all knew what that meant. Tonight couldn't be spent apart. Sairi stood and pulled the cot's blanket free. We'll need to stay close. She didn't say for warmth. She didn't have to. Rinya hadn't spoken since the outage. She stood by the door, staring out the small port window. When she finally turned back, her face was different, tight around the mouth, unreadable. We've been in worse, she said, crossing the room. Just not with someone who gave a damn. Her voice was hard, but it trembled. Corin caught it. You think that's a weakness? I think it's dangerous, she replied. I think we're not used to it, and I don't know what to do with that. He stepped toward her slowly. You're not the only one who doesn't know what to do. She looked up at him, sharp, defensive, but her eyes gave something else away. Fear. Real, human fear. Of closeness. Of softness. Of hope. Then, before she could stop herself, she leaned forward and pressed her face against his chest. Not passionately, not hungrily, desperately. She held him like a woman holding something she never expected to find again. Her breath stuttered. Her hands curled against his back. Caliph and Sairi didn't interrupt. They sat on the cot, watching silently. Corin held her without a word. When she finally pulled back, she didn't look at him. Don't make me feel safe unless you plan to stay. I never planned any of this, he said honestly. That answer must have been enough. Because she nodded, then stepped past him and sat on the edge of the cot beside Caliph. Corin stood in the center of the room, surrounded by silence and 4 old blankets. Then Caliph reached up, took his hand, and gently pulled him toward them. This isn't about debt, she said. It's about choosing what feels right. He sat, and that night, they didn't separate. Rinya lay behind Caliph, one arm draped across her sister's waist. Caliph rested her head on Corin's chest. Sairi pressed in from the other side, curling against his ribs. One leg slipped over his. The blankets barely covered them. Their bodies had to do the rest. There was no rush, no expectations, only heat, breath, and the quiet sound of skin shifting against skin. At one point, Sairi whispered, "Can I?" But she didn't finish the question. Her hand simply rested over his chest. Corin took her hand, held it. Yes. Caliph's fingers brushed the edge of his jaw. Her lips were close, almost brushing his neck. "You're warm," she murmured. "You smell like earth." He kissed her forehead. Then Rinya's voice, from behind them, cracked through the dark. "I don't want to be alone again. Not ever." No one answered her. They didn't need to. In the cold, they stayed that way, tangled, half-covered, limbs overlapping, breathing synced. The shelter might have lost power, but inside that makeshift bed, nothing felt broken. It wasn't sex. Not yet. But it was intimacy. Earned. Chosen. Real. And in that fragile silence, under fraying blankets and failing heat, all 4 of them finally admitted, without saying a word, what they had become. A single unit. A family in the making. One more chapter remained.